The moment the alien shuttle touched down on the grass outside my window, I already knew this was going to end badly for them. Not for us, for them. My name is Daniel Foster, and 3 hours ago, I was drinking coffee on my porch like any other morning. Now I was standing in a field with translators strapped to my wrist, watching a silver ship the size of a house fold itself open like a flower made of metal. Steam rolled out from the seams, a ramp lowered, and out walked the first alien delegation to ever set foot on Earth. They called themselves the Valkyrie, tall, thin, skin the color of wet stone, eyes too large for their narrow faces. Their leader introduced herself as Naira, speaking through a device clipped to her collar that turned her clicks and hums into smooth, calm English. "We have observed your world for 6 of your years," she said, her wide eyes sweeping across the open farmland behind me. "We expected hostility. We expected weapons pointed at our ship. Instead, we find fields, flowers, children waving from a distance." I forced a smile. "We try to be welcoming." She turned to her companion, a shorter Valkyrie, with darker markings down his neck, and made a soft clicking sound that I guessed meant something like satisfied. I had been assigned as their liaison that morning, pulled straight from my desk job at the Regional Coordination Office, because I spoke 3 languages, and, according to my supervisor, had a calm face. I didn't feel calm. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something enormous, and nobody else seemed to notice it yet. "Your planet is beautiful," Naira said, walking further into the field, her boots crushing soft grass. Lush, warm, undefended. That last word hung in the air a little too long. "We have defenses," I said carefully. She smiled, if that expression could be called a smile on a face like hers. "Where? We scanned your atmosphere for 2 years. No orbital platforms. No visible weapons on your cities. Your armies, from what we can tell, are small and scattered. Your world is soft, Daniel Foster. Soft like fruit." I didn't answer that. There wasn't a good way to answer that. Instead, I offered to show them the town. That was my first mistake, though I didn't know it yet. Not because anything went wrong. Because everything went right, and that was exactly the problem. We spent the whole afternoon walking through Milbrook, the small town nearest the landing site. Naira and her 4 companions moved through the streets like tourists in a museum, marveling at everything. Children rode bicycles past them, laughing, unafraid. An old woman named Carol offered them lemonade from her porch. A group of teenagers asked if they could touch Naira's translator device, and she let them, delighted by their curiosity instead of offended by it. "Your species is remarkably trusting," said the shorter Valkyrie, whose name I learned was Austin. "On our world, the arrival of an unknown ship would have emptied the streets. Here, you bring us lemonade." "We don't have a lot of practice being afraid of the sky," I said. It was true, mostly. We'd had almost a century of science fiction preparing us for this moment, and somehow none of it had prepared anyone to actually be scared. By late afternoon, the delegation had toured the market, the school, and the small clinic at the edge of town. Naira kept a small device in her hand, tapping notes into it every few minutes. I caught glimpses of what she was recording. Words like agricultural surplus, population density, no visible fortification, minimal weapon presence, emotional volatility, low. That last one made me want to laugh, but I kept my face still. Around 4 in the afternoon, as the light began turning gold and long, Naira stopped walking and looked at me directly. "Daniel Foster, I must ask you something, and I want an honest answer." "Go ahead. Is your species this gentle everywhere, or is this town special, prepared for our visit?" I thought about how to answer that. The truth was complicated, and I wasn't sure the Valkyrie were ready for the complicated version. "We're gentle when we choose to be," I said finally. "Most of the time, choosing to be gentle is easy. It's the version of us we like best." She tilted her head, the alien equivalent of confusion. "And when is it not easy?" I looked at the sky. The sun was dropping lower, painting the clouds in orange and deep red. Somewhere behind me, I heard shop shutters beginning to close, a sound I had heard every evening of my life and never once questioned. "You'll want to be back at your ship before dark," I said, instead of answering. Naira's companions exchanged a glance among themselves, a flicker of something that might have been amusement. Why? Asen asked. Do your predators still roam free? We detected no large carnivorous life near this settlement. It's not about predators, I said. Then what? I hesitated, and that hesitation was another mistake, because to them it read as evasion, and evasion read as weakness, and weakness read as something to be studied rather than respected. It's just how things work here, I said. Trust me on this one. Naira's wide eyes studied me for a long moment, then she turned to her team and spoke rapidly in her own language, the clicks and hums too fast for the translator to catch. Whatever she said made two of her companions laugh, an odd sound like wind through metal pipes. Daniel, she said, switching back to English, we did not travel across the stars to be frightened by a sunset. We would like to continue our observations into the evening. It is, after all, the most honest way to understand a civilization. People behave differently when they think no one important is watching. I felt something tighten in my chest. I really think you should return to the ship, I said. We appreciate your concern, Naira said, already walking again, her four companions falling into step behind her. But we are not children, and Milbrook seems like the safest place on the entire planet. I stood there for a second, watching them walk deeper into town as the sun kissed the horizon, and I realized there was nothing more I could say that they would actually hear. I had grown up in a world where sundown meant something specific, something everyone understood without needing to be told twice, and these 5 visitors from across the galaxy were about to learn that lesson the hard way, in real time, with me as their only witness. So I followed them. The streets of Milbrook, usually busy until dinner, were emptying faster than I expected. Shop owners waved cheerful goodbyes to the aliens as they pulled down their metal shutters. Parents called their children in from yards with the particular sharp whistle that every kid in town recognized immediately. Porch lights flicked on one by one, small warm circles pushing back against the coming dark. Naira noticed the emptying streets and made another note in her device. Fascinating, she murmured. A kind of curfew, cultural perhaps, religious. Something like that, I said, though it wasn't exactly a lie. We reached the edge of the town square just as the last sliver of sun disappeared behind the tree line. The streetlights buzzed to life above us, and for a moment, everything was quiet in a way that made my skin prickle. Asen looked around at the empty square, at the closed shops, at the porch lights glowing behind curtained windows, and made a soft clicking sound of satisfaction. You see, he said to Naira, completely peaceful. Your species retreats indoors, and the world simply goes still. No violence, no chaos, just silence. It is beautiful, Naira agreed, and for the first time since they landed, I heard something like genuine warmth in her voice. A species this gentle deserves protection, not conquest. I will recommend to the Council that we offer guardianship rather than acquisition. We could bring stability to this world. Peace, order, in exchange for resources and cooperation, of course. I almost laughed at the word guardianship, the way it was dressed up to sound like a gift instead of what it actually meant. You should really head back now, I said again, more firmly this time. Please. Naira turned to look at me, and something in my voice must have finally reached her, because her expression shifted, curiosity sharpening into something closer to caution. You keep insisting, she said slowly. Why does this trouble you so much, Daniel? Before I could answer, a sound broke the silence of the square. Not a scream, not an alarm, just footsteps, calm and steady, coming from the alley beside the old bakery. A man stepped into the light of the street lamp. I recognized him immediately. Gordon, who ran the hardware store 2 streets over, a man in his 50s with a gray beard and reading glasses that were always sliding down his nose. During the day, he sold nails and paint and gave kids free candy from a jar on his counter. He was not carrying nails or paint now. He stopped a respectful distance away, nodded politely to the aliens, and then looked directly at me. Evening, Daniel, he said. Heard we had visitors. Figured someone should make sure they got where they were going safe. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Thanks, Gordon. Naira's eyes moved between us, between Gordon's calm posture and the object resting easily against his shoulder, something the translator didn't have a word for, because the Velkari had never needed a civilian to carry one. "What is that?" Austin asked, his voice noticeably higher than before. "Just a little insurance," Gordon said, friendly as ever. "Town like ours, you get used to keeping an eye on the dark. Nothing personal, folks. You're welcome here. Just wanted you to know, you're not walking around unnoticed." Another set of footsteps echoed from the opposite side of the square, then another, from the road leading toward the school. Within a minute, 6 more townspeople had appeared at the edges of the square, spaced apart in a way that looked casual but wasn't, each one carrying themselves with the same easy readiness as Gordon. A woman named Priya, who taught 3rd grade and always wore bright scarves, gave the delegation a small wave. A young man named Elliot, who I recognized from the gas station, nodded politely and said nothing at all. None of them raised their voices. None of them made a single threatening gesture. They simply stood there, calm and present, like the night itself had decided to introduce them. Naira's translator device buzzed with something that sounded like static, her own breathing picking up audibly through the small speaker. "Daniel," she said quietly, "what is happening right now?" "This is what happens after dark," I said. "Every night, in every town, all over the world." "You said there were no defenses," Austin said, his voice tight. "Your scans showed no military presence." "We don't have soldiers standing in the streets," I said. "We have neighbors. Shopkeepers, teachers, people with regular lives who also happen to know how to protect the people around them when the sun goes down. During the day, this town is exactly what you saw. Farmers, children, lemonade on the porch. At night, it's something else. Not because we're hiding weapons under the flowers. Because we chose, a long time ago, not to need them during daylight." Naira stood very still, her large eyes moving slowly across the square, taking in the quiet figures at every corner, the porch lights glowing steady behind curtained windows, the complete absence of panic in anyone's posture. This wasn't chaos. It wasn't fear. It was simply readiness, worn as comfortably as a favorite jacket. "Your scans measured farms because we chose farms," I continued. "Not because we couldn't build something else. We just decided, generation after generation, that gardens were worth more than walls, as long as we could still protect the gardens when it mattered." Gordon shifted his weight, glancing at Naira with something close to sympathy. "Didn't mean to give you a fright," he said. "We don't get visitors from the stars every day. Wanted to make sure this went smooth for everyone. That's all." Austin's clicking had gone quiet entirely. He looked at Naira, waiting for her to say something, to give some order, to explain what any of this meant for their mission. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at me, and for the first time since they'd landed, I saw something in her expression that wasn't curiosity or condescension. It was closer to respect, mixed with something that might have been the beginning of fear. "You allowed us to see only the daylight," she said slowly, "on purpose." "No," I said. "I tried to warn you. Twice. You wanted to see the truth. This is the truth. Both halves of it." She looked around the square again, at Priya's bright scarf catching the streetlight, at Elliot's quiet nod, at 6 ordinary people who had simply shown up because word travels fast in a small town, and everyone understood, without needing to be told, that strangers walking the streets after dark deserved someone watching over them, whether that someone came from 3 streets away or 300 light-years away. "We came expecting a species too gentle to defend itself," Naira said quietly, almost to herself. "A world we could guide, protect, absorb without resistance. Instead, we find a species that guards its gentleness so carefully, it built an entire second self just to keep the first one safe." "That's a nice way of putting it," I said. She turned to her companions and spoke a short string of clicks, calm now, no trace of the earlier confidence in her tone. Austin nodded and began walking back toward the edge of town, the other 3 Velkari falling in step behind him without argument. Naira lingered a moment longer, studying the square one last time before looking back at me. "I will tell the council," she said, "that Earth is not a paradise for the taking. It is a paradise that decided, on its own, how much of itself to show the world. I think that is a very different thing." "It usually is," I said. "Will you walk us back to the ship?" she asked. "I would feel better with you beside us. Your neighbors are very calm, but I confess, I am still adjusting. I smiled, and this time it wasn't forced. Of course. We walked back through the square together, past Gordon, who tipped an imaginary hat in farewell, past Priya, who wished them a safe journey home, past Elliot, who simply raised a hand. None of them followed us. None of them needed to. Their part was already finished, quietly and without a single raised voice, exactly the way it always was. The shuttle ramp lowered as we approached, spilling soft blue light across the grass. Naira paused at the base of it and turned back to face me one last time. Can I ask you something else, Daniel? Something personal? Go ahead. Why do your people smile so much during the day? If you carry this readiness with you always, why not show it? Why hide it behind lemonade and waving children? I thought about that question for a long moment, watching the stars begin to appear behind her ship, thinking about every ordinary morning I'd ever had, every quiet evening, every version of my life that existed in the space between sunrise and sunset. Because daylight is the only time we get to put it down, I said. We know what we're capable of when we need to be. That knowledge doesn't go away, but knowing it means we don't have to prove it every single day. So during the day, we choose to be soft. We choose gardens over guns, lemonade over locked doors, waving children over watching eyes. It isn't weakness. It's the reward we give ourselves for being strong enough not to need to show it. Naira was quiet for a long time after that, her large eyes reflecting the ship's blue light, and when she finally spoke, her voice had lost every trace of the confidence she'd arrived with that morning. I think, she said, we owe your world an apology for what we assumed. You're not the first visitors to misunderstand us, I said. You probably won't be the last. Just remember what you saw tonight, and maybe the next world you visit, you'll ask a few more questions before the sun goes down. She extended a hand, an odd gesture for her species, clearly borrowed from watching us all afternoon, and I shook it. Thank you, Daniel Foster, she said, for the warning, and for walking with us anyway, even when we ignored it. That's what neighbors do, I said, even the ones from very far away. The ramp closed behind her a few minutes later, and I stood alone in the dark field, watching the shuttle's lights rise slowly into the night sky, growing smaller and smaller until they blended in with the stars they'd come from. Behind me, Milbrook had already returned to its usual quiet evening rhythm, porch lights glowing warm, a dog barking somewhere in the distance, the ordinary sounds of a town that had, once again, protected itself without ever needing to raise its voice. I walked home slowly, hands in my pockets, thinking about Naira's question, the one about smiling so much during the day. It stayed with me the whole way back, turning over and over in my mind, until I reached my own porch and sat down in the same chair I'd been sitting in that morning, coffee long gone cold on the table beside me. Tomorrow, the sun would rise again, and Milbrook would go back to being exactly what the Velkari saw on their first afternoon here: gardens, laughter, open doors, nothing hidden, nothing locked away, nothing pretending to be something it wasn't. Because that was the whole point. We weren't pretending during the day and revealing the truth at night. Both were true. Both were us. We simply understood, better than any visitor ever could on their first visit, that gentleness and strength were never opposites. They were just two halves of the same quiet promise we made to each other, every single day, whether the stars were watching or not. Above me, the last light of the shuttle disappeared completely into the dark, and somewhere out there, among 1,000 unfamiliar stars, a report was already being written about a small, soft-looking planet that turned out to be something else entirely once the sun went down.